Hey, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and we have a special guest today, Brandon DaCruz. So today's episode is all about the concept of energy flux, or some people refer to it as G-flux. So we're going to be diving into that today. Before I chat about some of the specific takeaways, I do want to give you a little background on Brandon. So Brandon DaCruz is an online nutrition and physique coach, internationally published fitness model, national level NPC competitor, let me slow down a bit, and national sales manager for a New York-based sports nutrition company. Brandon has spent the past 12 years working within the sports nutrition and fitness industries and believes in blending what's been proven in the research with his own anecdotal and firsthand in the trenches experience to improve body composition, optimize performance, and enhance health in order to help his clients achieve their goals, whether that be building muscle, losing body fat, increasing performance, or overall optimizing health and longevity. So like I mentioned in today's episode, we're diving into this concept of energy flux. We're going to be chatting about the two forms of energy flux. We're going to be chatting about how you can achieve high energy flux and why that's important. And we're going to be diving into the benefits of high energy flux as compared to low energy flux. And Brandon's going to be chatting about some of the research studies that are out there, specifically with appetite regulation, metabolic health, things like that. And we're also going to be discussing the benefits of energy flux, in particular with weight loss maintenance, which is something that a lot of people tend to struggle with. Once we lose the body fat, once we lose the weight, what happens next? How do we maintain that loss? Because we know that I believe the statistic is about 90% of people, or 80 to 90% of people who lose weight actually regain that weight within, I think it's like 2 or 3 years. And there's another percentage of those who actually regain more weight. So, weight loss maintenance is one of the biggest problems when it comes to the nutrition and fitness industry. It's like, yes, we can get people to lose weight and lose body fat, but how do we maintain that long term? So that's where energy flux comes in. And that's why I'm super excited for you to hear this episode. And we're also going to be tackling some of the practical applications of how to apply energy flux so that you can do this in your own life. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Brandon DaCruz. All right, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I'm here with Brandon DaCruz. What's up, Brandon? How are you?
Hey, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here with you today.
I'm excited you're here. We are going to be talking all about energy flux today, or G-flux. And as we were talking off air, it's something that I've been super interested in learning more about and, getting it out on the podcast. I don't think this topic has ever come up on a previous podcast. So I'm excited to dive deep into it today. And before we do you want to just give our listeners just a quick background on who you are, what you do?
Absolutely. So I am a online nutrition coach and national sales manager of a supplement company. And I've been in the fitness industry full time for the past 12 years. So I've done everything from fitness modeling to competing myself. And now, my main focus is really on helping other people achieve their goals, whether it be body composition wise, fat loss, health wise. And this is kind of where I've gotten into energy flux and a lot of the things that we'll speak on, especially on optimizing metabolism, maintaining fat loss, and essentially integrating movement and physical activity into your daily lifestyle to maintain the results, because we see a lot of people in today's society that they want fat loss and they get to their goal, but then the rate of recidivism is so high. So that's really what's gotten me into this topic and really what my message is when I speak to clients or on podcasts or any of the posts that I make.
Love it. Definitely, in the same camp as you. I think, the weight loss or the fat loss part it's not necessarily easy, but the part after is usually the harder part, right? The maintaining and kind of, figuring out how to do that long term. So love it. All right. So why don't we just dive right in? So today, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about energy flux. People also refer to it as G-flux. So can you just kind of give us a little background on what that is, kind of define it for us?
Absolutely. So before I give you the broad-based definition of energy flux, I want to point out why this matters to those listening, as I tend, and I will do this in this podcast, I'll dive into the science. And I'll get into the reasons as to why this is useful. But really my whole reason of wanting to know the mechanism of action behind why certain approaches work is with my ultimate goal, which is to teach people what energy flux is, what benefits high energy flux provides, and how they can apply energy flux to their own fitness journeys. So for instance, fat loss is an area that I've always been interested in, both as a former competitor and now as a coach. However, when I first got into coaching, 8 or so years ago, I noticed that I was able to get both myself and a lot of my clients lean and in shape, but many didn't maintain those results, 12 months down the line, let alone 3. So after the diet had ended, this kind of sent me down this rabbit hole. Not only like the physiology behind fat loss and weight loss in general, but also what we could do to maintain significant weight loss so that we don't just get to a goal and then just to quickly regain it, all that fat that we work so hard to lose. So since then, I've, seen that one of the largest contributors to body weight regulation and fat loss maintenance is our levels of physical activity, which is why I'm always constantly speaking to my clients and friends about like keeping up their NEAT levels. And I try to get everyone into a high energy flux state, especially after finishing fat loss phase. So the issue with society today and why so many people are out of shape and unhealthy is that our energy expenditure doesn't match our intake. So given our modern food environment and our evolutionary drive to eat delicious, hyperpalatable, energy-dense foods, which are everywhere, it's less likely for those living a sedentary life to be able to accurately match that low energy expenditure with a low energy, or low calorie intake over the time course of our lives. So that's really where we get to energy flux and the concept and what it is. And so just to give you like a broad-based definition of what energy flux is, pretty much refers to our energy turnover. So this includes the amount of calories we eat, as well as how many we burn through activity. Now, the goal when trying to regulate body weight, especially after finishing a fat loss phase, is to get to a state of energy balance where our expenditure, or how much we're burning, and our intake are evenly matched. However, we can reach energy balance using either a high flux or a low flux model, which is primarily based on the amount of activity we do and the amount of calories we consume.
Got it. I was just waiting for you to keep going because I was just like listening. Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. So in terms of like the low versus high energy flux, do you want to dive into a little bit of that?
Absolutely. So let's unpack that. So a lot of times you'll hear people say this commonality that they'll say, when you're losing fat, you want to eat less, move more. And yes, fundamentally, we're putting ourselves in an energy deficit. That's what's needed to be done to lose fat. However, to maintain fat and maintain weight loss in general, it's a completely different model. So for example, if you were to go into a low energy flux state, you'd be maintaining your weight through a low caloric intake coupled with low activity levels. So essentially you'd be eating a little amount of food and then you'd be fairly sedentary because you had low energy. So this is often the situation we see people in after finishing a fat loss diet, as their calorie intake has become lower and lower due to their metabolic rate slowing as a result of adaptive thermogenesis. And then their activity levels have lowered as well due to the effects that metabolic adaptation has on our NEAT levels and energy in general. So a low flux state is essentially where you put in less energy into the system and you also get less energy out as a result of eating less and then having to move less. So this is kind of like when I'm describing this to clients, this is what I refer to as a restriction-based model of maintenance. Because think about it, to maintain that body weight, you got to eat less and you got to stay at that lowered intake. Now that's, in my opinion, not ideal. So on the other hand, if you're in a high flux state, you'd be maintaining your weight through essentially eating more and being more physically active, which allows your calorie intake to be much higher than it'd be in a low flux state, as the increase in activity is keeping you in energy balance, so you're able to stay lean at a higher maintenance level of calories. So being in high energy flux pretty much means that you're putting more energy into the system and you're getting more out. So when I'm describing this, and this is a goal for clients that come to me having just done a dramatic fat loss phase, or anyone that I've worked with like contest prep clients, this is what I'm referring to them as. This is an abundant-based model of maintenance. And how we differentiate it is basically the big difference between whether you're in low or high energy flux is whether you're sedentary or active, and how many calories you're eating to match your level of activity. So we can maintain weight loss through either method. But I personally tend, with myself and with my clients, to go with the high energy flux side so we can eat more rather than chronically restricting ourselves.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. So in terms of like I mean, I guess we can dive into the practicality in a bit, but do you want to maybe chat about some of because I know you mentioned you're going to talk about a little bit about the science. You want to chat about some of the research that's out there on this, and kind of how you then afterwards we can talk about how to actually like apply that and what it kind of looks like.
Absolutely. So I do want to do a little caveat before that, because often when we refer to high energy flux, people are thinking eat more and move more, but that's not necessarily just the truth. That's what would be ideal, because that would be the case for a lean person. But actually, high energy flux can be achieved in one of two ways. But it's important to note that high energy flux always includes eating higher intakes of food, and I'll explain why. So the first scenario, which is what I consider the ideal scenario, is to reach high energy flux through high physical activity coupled with high calories, which would be achieved by relatively lean individuals at healthy body weights. So they're moving a lot, they're able to eat a lot, and they're able to stay at a healthy body weight as a result. However, if we look into the literature, high energy flux is also a state that can be achieved through high physical body weight, leading to a higher resting metabolic rate and then a higher resting energy expenditure despite having low activity levels. So this state would actually be achieved by those that are obese or overweight and technically have faster metabolisms due to the fact that they have higher total body mass. So their resting metabolic rate is higher. The thermic effective feeding is higher because they're eating a lot more. And then even if we just think about like the caloric cost of activity, even if they're doing small amounts of activity, because they have a bigger body, it takes more calories to move that body. So when I'm talking about high energy flux, what I'm looking to do with my clients is to get them in that lean state and maintain their weight and fat loss through the first high energy flux scenario. And the reason that I lean towards being in a high flux state after a fat loss phase is that it tends to provide a ton more benefits than maintaining your energy balance or your weight through a low flux state.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I feel like, everybody, well, at least for me, I would much rather be eating more than eating less. And I think that goes for most people. So can you, just because you had those two different scenarios, what would that look like for like the second one with the person who is, more obese and in that higher energy flux? What does that look like practically? Because obviously it makes sense, the more weight you have, right, the higher your metabolism is because you're moving around a heavier body. That's just, how it works. But what would that like look like in a practical sense for someone who is maybe obese or overweight and they're trying to establish a higher energy flux, but they still want to, lose significant amount of body fat? Like what would that look like?
Well, so technically it would look like them increasing their energy expenditure through activity. So really what we're looking at in high energy flux is really the higher intake of food, which really when we look at it evolutionarily, we kind of have a drive to go into a high energy flux state for one of two reasons. One, high energy flux would have been achieved because evolutionarily we were pushed to try to be driven to find food and search for our food, or it would be to resist weight loss and gain body fat as a storage mechanism. So in the second scenario, those obese individuals, in order to get into a healthy high flux state, what they would need to do is to increase activity and actually lose weight through the process. So it would be high energy flux with the goal of weight loss. So they could still eat a decent amount of calories, because if you think about it, even if they went into a net deficit for what their current intake is, it would still be sufficient because their resting metabolic rate is so high. So for example, if you've ever had an overweight client come to you, say, I'll tell you personally, I've had guys that are over 300 pounds come to me. What they're able to get away with food wise as compared to a 150-pound female that comes to me is much different. So that's where we often see, I'll have this situation where I'll have couples come to me and they're both, heavy set or overweight, and they want to lose weight. And the woman, the female out of the group or out of the couple is often like disappointed because her male husband is losing weight, A, so much faster, and B, he's able to eat so much more food. But the reason is because his resting metabolic rate is so much higher. His ability to eat more calories, even in a weight loss phase, enables his thermic effective feeding to be higher, and just doing the same amount of activity per se. Say he's doing 30 minutes of cardio a day and she's doing 30 minutes of cardio a day. He's technically burning more calories. So yes, they're both in high energy flux, but really what we want to do is use energy flux for weight loss maintenance, not just for weight loss. So what we would look to do with an obese individual is put them into a deficit, get them down to a healthy body weight, and then use the titration of physical activity to enable them to continually eat more as they move more and keep themselves in energy balance, which if we think about it from a dieting perspective, we could use one of two approaches when we finish a diet. We could stay chronically low in calories, like in that low flux state, or we could use the high flux model. But here's the thing, with the low flux state, there's a lot of detriments to that because the adherence rate, people are driven, when you're at the end of a diet, you have so many metabolic adaptations. Your satiety signals are skewed. Your leptin levels have dropped. Your ghrelin levels are through the roof. So your hunger hormones are overwhelming you, especially in like our obesogenic environment. So take someone that is obese and has lost a significant amount of weight. If I tell them, this client, listen, I have to keep you at a low caloric intake because you're sedentary, they're going to be more likely to essentially fall off the wagon and suffer to that recidivism rate. So that's where we would look to titrate up their activity, get them into a place where they're more metabolically flexible, they have better metabolic health. So what I really want to do with high energy flux is the best thing about weight loss are besides the physical aspects and the benefits from that perspective, are all the metabolic benefits that we see. And we also see that high energy flux after a diet has been shown to have so many other benefits. So I'm going to go over some of the benefits with you so the audience can see that, yes, weight loss has all these benefits, but if you regain that weight, you're going to essentially erase or erode a lot of those benefits. However, we can overcome that by maintaining that weight loss and maintaining those benefits through a high energy flux state. So for instance, it's been shown that high energy flux is more predictive of long-term weight loss maintenance and a lower rate of recidivism, so lower likelihood to gain back the weight. Another benefit is it allows you to sustain a higher calorie intake, which makes the process more enjoyable. And adherence will be better due to the higher, food intake and the increased flexibility. And that's especially important after a diet. Also, you're more likely to hit all your micronutrient needs as a result of having a wider spectrum of food to choose from. Another benefit that people don't think of in terms of high energy flux or activity is it actually makes you more sensitive to satiety signals and helps regulate appetite and manage hunger. So that, again, we're talking about better adherence rates. And then let's look into the physical benefits or, the physiological benefits. It leads to better metabolic health. So that increase in activity allows for better insulin sensitivity and partitioning of nutrients. So you can not only eat more, but handle those nutrients better, especially when it comes to glucose. So I'll tell you personally, with all my clients, I track their blood glucose levels. And then I also do pretty extensive blood work. I'm looking at fasted insulin levels. I'm looking at HbA1c. And I'll notice that when I put them in a higher flux state, meaning that they're doing more aerobic activity, that their fasted blood glucose levels come into a much lower range. And also what's especially important is their postprandial readings. They're coming back into that healthier range 2 to 2.5 hours after a meal, much more regularly and much more frequently than they did when they were in a lower flux state, or before when they first came to me. And I have all these readings where I'm looking at, charts of months of progress. So besides that, you're getting better aerobic, better aerobic fitness because you're doing more activity. You see improvements in blood pressure, improvements in resting heart rate. And then I know you're going to like this one. Think about it. If you're doing more activity and you're utilizing nutrients better, you're becoming more metabolically flexible. So your ability to use both substrates, both carbohydrates for energy and fat for energy, is much improved, where we see that metabolic inflexibility is one of the leading causes for things like diabetes or metabolic syndrome, or any of those issues that are essentially as an effect of excess toxicity from whether it be fats or carbohydrate consumption. So just improving these aspects for whether you were someone that stayed lean all the time and just got a little bit leaner and wanted to maintain it, or that obese individual that got lean and then wants to stay lean to preserve those metabolic benefits they got from weight loss, this higher energy flux model allows them to do so.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that all makes complete sense. And it's all very, in terms of practicality. I guess the one thing that kind of I'm leaning towards, and you mentioned about the appetite regulation. So, I've always kind of learned and researched and even kind of noticed it myself in terms of if I am dieting or have clients go through diet and we increase, cardio, for example, or some type of, conditioning, sometimes people notice that their appetite actually goes up. So, and then that makes it kind of harder to adhere because obviously you're hungry. So, you've been talking about activity and increasing movement and all of that. So maybe we can just quickly make sure that we define what that aerobic activity looks like, because obviously people listening to this podcast will understand, or most people will understand the difference between aerobic and anaerobic work. But I don't want to kind of misconstrue kind of where we're going in the sense of, yes, the energy flux and the high flux state is more so we're focused on the aerobic side of things, okay, what does that look like? Does that mean that I have to go spend hours on the treadmill every day or the elliptical, or, what, doing high intensity stuff? Like, what does that aerobic style, like move more, actually look like in a practical sense?
Okay, so I'm so glad you asked that, because it's often misconstrued and it's misinterpreted. And I often get these like comments on my posts and stuff, and people will ask me, and even clients, the reason I say, move more, eat more, rather than exercise more, eat more, or train more, eat more, is that it's low intensity activity. So it could be anything from like your NEAT. So just tracking steps. It could be daily walks. So how I implement it into my clients' programs is I ask them to find an activity that they like, something that's just going to keep them active. So it could be, do you like garden? I have some women that love gardening. So they're outside, they're active. Some guys, they like working on their yard. Other people, they like playing out on the playground with their kids. It's anything that gets you into movement and play, but I don't want people to think about it as you're on the treadmill, Yes, I coach a lot of athletes and I titrate up their steps in that capacity, or their aerobic fitness in that level. But it's something that it could be like a 6 Met equivalent, which is six times above your metabolic rate. But that's a slow walk. That's like 2 miles per hour. And you're still getting that benefit of calorie expenditure and then the appetite regulation. And I also want, I'm going to dive into a study actually to reinforce this. But I also want people to realize this isn't, energy flux and keeping a higher energy flux is not just about calorie expenditure. And that's what a lot of people look at cardio for, which it is. Cardio and diet is how you control your calorie, the calories in and the calories outside of things. But it plays energy flux in and of itself, that movement, just the active movement is playing so much more of a role than just calorie expenditure. So we'll dive into how it affects appetite. But even if we look at the literature, a lot of the things that they're looking at are just people's daily activities. So you'll see like construction workers have high energy flux. You see factory workers. It's activities of daily living. So it's not something that's like intentional. Now, in our modern environment, yes, you would have to be more intentional. So for instance, like one of the methods that I use to increase my clients' energy flux and also their metabolic health is to do 10-minute walks after meals, especially large meals. So I'm doing that to get them active, not having them sit around. It's also helping with their blood sugar regulation, helping with insulin sensitivity. It's activating that GLUT4 translocation, which is non-insulin mediated. So you're going to get more uptake of glucose into the muscle cells. And so there's so many benefits, but it's also increasing their energy flux. So I really want people out there listening to realize this isn't just about training. It's not like I'm going to increase my energy flux by, doing more Metcons, or I'm going to do HIIT sprints, or it's honestly very low level activity, which is actually more beneficial for recovery and turning on that parasympathetic nervous system so that you're in more of a rest and relaxed state.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you clarified that, and it's something that I've gone through myself over the years, is like, just doing more and feeling like, I just need to do more to get results. And that's something that I preach to my clients as well a lot. It's like, no, we need to like dial it back, especially with the type A women that I work with. I'm type A as well. And we're always like, okay, we need to just like do more high intensity work, do more training, train more days a week. And so I preach that, it's not all like, you need to dial things back, in order to actually see the results, especially if you're kind of overreaching or whatever it may be. But this is like its kind of separate thing, right? With energy flux and movement, right? Like movement, as you mentioned, it's, daily activities, right? Just walking more, or you said gardening, things like that. And I think people they tend to put that into the same category. When you tell them to move more, it's like, oh, I need to go on the treadmill, or I need to, do 10 minutes of burpees or something like that, where it's like, no, it's just, low intensity stuff. So yeah, I really appreciate you kind of clarifying that, because I think it's something that is a little bit confusing. And then in terms of, how you track this. So for me, obviously, tracking steps with all my clients is like the main way that we do it. Is there any other way that you track with your clients besides just like looking at their daily steps? And the reason I ask is because, there are some kind of, neat activities that are not tracked through steps. So like, for example, I'm standing up right now at my desk, right? I try to stand half the day, which is increasing my overall, neat activity, but I'm not like necessarily stepping or moving. So is there any other like ways that you track it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is steps. That is something that I track with all of my clients. But other activities that they can't do, what I'll really do is try to have a movement block. So essentially what I'm looking for is amount of minutes moved. So sometimes that can be tracked, objectively, whether they have an Oura ring or something is able to quantify the caloric output of the energy expenditure that they're having. But honestly, a lot of these things, besides like Oura and Whoop, like your Fitbits and your general activity trackers, they're not good with calorie expenditure. So it's really hard to take that, because sometimes when I have clients track that and put that in their tracker to me, they'll overcompensate, because they'll say, well, Brandon, I'm burning 3,500 calories a day, but you have me at 3,000. And that's where I have to tell them, just like it's very common for people to overestimate their food intake, or essentially underestimate their food intake, but overeat as a result. It's very common for people to overestimate their expenditure. I mean, there's been studies that have showed up to a 50% increase in people's expected expenditure from exercise. So they think that they do an aerobic class, and they burn 900 calories, and they really burns around 400. So I'm weary with that. And it's really client dependent. So for instance, with all my clients, I'll track their NEAT. So I want them to hit a certain step count. And what I want to make clear is, in some of the studies that we go over, it's very, very high NEAT. So we'll break it down in terms of the numbers that they utilize. But really what energy flux is a titration up. So it's going from where you were sedentary. So for instance, I personally keep an activity level or a step count of 15,000 steps per day. And that's just based on my metabolic rate, what I've seen work for me, what keeps me in energy balance, or AK weight maintenance. With other clients, I have people come to me that are just, busy working professionals, and they're hitting 2,000 steps a day. So I'm not taking them from 2,000 to 15,000. I mean, that would be astronomical. So it's a titration up. But I also, if I have someone that say they're not, they're doing their NEAT, I have them at a moderate NEAT level, but they like to do other activities that couldn't be tracked. I do it in blocks of time. So for instance, I have a specific client that he does a lot of his work from his house, especially in today's environment, but he doesn't really like going out on walks. Everything's computer based. So he actually has, I don't know if you've seen like those stationary bikes that have the desk setup on them.
Yeah.
So he has one of those. So what we do is, instead of taking 10-minute walks, he does 10-minute, just a light stationary bike circuit right after. So he'll just do a little, very low resistance, low pace where it's comfortable. He does his work. He'll do his emails 10 minutes after every meal. So he does that 3 times per day. So he's getting the same benefits, but it's not going towards his NEAT count. But at the same time, I'm not telling him, well, my other clients are getting 3,000 steps within those 3 10-minute walks that I have them doing, so you need to increase your steps by 3,000. He's getting it just in a different capacity. So we got to think about energy flux. It's not just steps, but that is the major contributor, because that is the easiest to track, but it's also time, it's energy output. So anything, it could be just little blocks of things. And then for other clients, I just have them, listen, I'm going to have you integrate this into your daily lifestyle. If I have someone, especially a Gen Pop or a lifestyle client, I tell them things to integrate into their life. So I say, listen, from now on, I don't want you parking at the front of the parking lot. I want you to go to the back. I don't want you taking the steps at work or the escalator at work. I want you taking the stairs. So it's little things that just slowly increase their NEAT, their activity levels, even things that we couldn't track, or they might not be using a step counter at that, the beginning of a program, but it's stuff to make them just, really what I'm trying to do is enforce cognitive oversight so that they're aware, let me not take the convenient way out, because just like with our modern food environment, where we have so much readily accessible access to hyperpalatable foods, we also have all these conveniences, which make it so that we do less and less activities, which is why we see obesity and body fatness at the level that it's at.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I love that. And it's something that, I work with a lot of my clients as well on that too. And I think the biggest thing is a lot of people, especially with NEAT becoming more of a kind of I feel like it's a little bit of a buzzword now. Like everybody's talking about, NEAT and how important it is and beneficial it is. Whereas we kind of knew that for a while, like, moving is important for having a healthy lifestyle. But besides the step side of things, everything you mentioned, with just kind of tracking specific things and just being aware of it. I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen, especially with my clients. It's like, okay, let's just add some more awareness around this. And this comes from, okay, let's actually track this on a daily basis. Like let's, not obviously we're going to be tracking your steps, but there's going to be other times that you're going to be moving and we can, track that as well. So for example, I have clients that, do spin classes, right? A few times a week. And maybe, on the day they did their spin class, they didn't necessarily get, a bunch of steps in, right? Because they were doing spin. So, but that is a form of activity. It doesn't mean that it doesn't count, right? And then, for example, like some of my clients, in terms of like holding them accountable to actually, making these different habits, like you said, parking further away from the grocery store, or, one thing that I found very helpful for a lot of my clients is, setting, like you do this after you eat, you take a 10-minute walk, or setting alarms that go off on your phone every, few hours that say, hey, get up and walk around for 10 minutes. And then, and then what I do is like hold them accountable to doing that, right? So like if we have like our tracker and we check off a box each day that says, I actually got up when my alarm went off, right? And then I hold them accountable to doing that. And then over, a few, weeks, it turns into a habit, right? So I think that's one of the biggest things. It's like, yes, getting more steps is important, but for those people who are, super busy and it's just not, it's not they can't just get more steps in their lifestyle. Like they have all these other things going on. Okay, well, let's find these little areas that we can, optimize to get you moving a little bit more. And I think that's just the biggest thing. Like you said, just the awareness around it is like the first and the most important thing. And like actually tracking these things for a period of time so that it does become more of a habit, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to reinforce that, because I'm huge on mental framing. So I always consider what's going on a physiological level, but also on a psychological level. So it really is person dependent. So I will say the majority of my clients, yes, I give them a neat or a step count to hit. I track that with them. But then I have some people that I notice are a little bit resistant. So just like you had mentioned that when you have clients dieting, and I see this too, because I've studied very in-depth, metabolic adaptation and the down regulations that come along with that. When you're in a dieted state, you tend to start compensating. You're down regulating meat. You're also doing less activity. If you're training hard at the gym, you tend to like slouch on the couch more when you're at home. But I have certain clients that I notice this compensatory effect, even when they're not at low levels of body fat. So they're just maintaining a lean, healthy body fat level. But I notice that they'll be, their needs slacking off, or they'll tell me, I'll have this in my check-in forms. I have a very extensive, check-in form, that they're feeling like more lazy or more lethargic or more sluggish, or, they're doing less things with their kids. Like I'm asking about all these things. What are you doing in a relationship? Are you going on your hikes? Like those are things I'm always like trying to get some type of activity, but I'm trying to make it in a communal aspect. So I'll oftentimes give them an assignment every night, before, or after dinner, go on a walk with your wife, just relationship building. And I put it in a different context. Yes, I'm trying to get activity, but I'm also trying to better your relationship. I'm trying to, set up your circadian rhythm. I'm trying to get you some sunlight exposure. So that's how I get people to do fasted cardio. I tell them about the benefits of, getting sunlight exposure in the morning, getting that optic, the sunlight into your optic nerves, and setting up, getting light early in the day is going to actually help you sleep better at night. So I'm always about this mental framing, but I do have certain clients that I notice that compensatory mechanism. And that's where I'm asking them, listen, you're telling me you're falling asleep at work. Once every hour, I want you to just get up for 5 minutes, stand at your desk, go for a walk around the office, or just go outside. It's just them getting up and being active, because if you look at it, sitting's like the new smoking. So really my whole thing, it's movement, but it's not just, I don't want it just to be put in the context of training. I don't want them to just think, well, I'm allocated this amount of volume per week, this amount of cardio per week, and this amount of steps. It's more like, let's integrate, all those things are very, very important. Don't get me wrong. We have to hit the X's and O's, the macros, the calories, the sets, the reps, the minutes of cardio, and the steps. But other than that, I don't want you just hitting that for the duration that you work with me. I want to re-ingrain positive habits into your lifestyle and work on behavior modification so you're a more physically active person, because that's going to lead you to living a leaner, healthier life over the long term, whether you work with me or not. So if you just remember, like a lot of my clients, even after having finished work with me, they're always tagging me on their 10-minute walks and stuff, because that's just something that they felt better. They had better energy after taking that walk. They noticed their digestion was better. So it's just these little things. They don't even think about it as exercise anymore, because I don't frame it as such. I'm like, listen, you have digestive issues. You notice it after certain meals. You also have high fasted glucose levels as well as high postprandial glucose levels. So let's do a walk. That's how we're going to mitigate that. Instead of throwing a supplement and a Band-Aid at it, which I'm not opposed to, because, I work in the supplement industry. I think supplements in the right form are very efficacious, but let's do a lifestyle intervention first. Hey, you notice that you're really stressed around these meetings. Well, after you get out of work, go for a walk, just decompress. Let's turn on that parasympathetic nervous system. So I'm framing it in a sense where they have intrinsic motivators besides just the body composition, benefits or the calorie expenditure. And that's why I really like this high flux model, because it's not just about the body composition. It's also about the health that comes along with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. So one question I do have, because this is something that I came across a while ago. I don't remember exactly, what study it was, and I heard a few people talking about it, but there was it was a study that was done. I wish I looked it up before we started recording, but they were looking at the difference in terms of steps and like getting to a certain, I think it was like 15 or 16,000 steps a day. Like anything beyond that wasn't beneficial in the sense of like, quote unquote, burning more. Have you come across that at all, or am I talking for it?
I think what you're talking or you're referring to is what's considered the constrained energy model, which is by Herman Ponzer, which is an evolutionary anthropologist. So his study, it didn't show exactly how many steps, but we have to consider everything's context. So remember, when I said high energy flux, it's high intake. That's the first thing. So high energy flux is sustained by those that are lean and active, eating a lot of food, or those that are heavy set and overweight, but eating a lot of food. So that's the denominator. Let's look at it as that's the one thing that you need. Now, Herman Ponzer's research was actually on the Hadza, which is a tribe in Tanzania, I believe. And so what he saw was there was a constrained energy model, meaning they were very, very active tribes. Obviously, they're like in a different hunter-gatherer species, essentially. So it's not like what we're seeing in modern societies, but what they saw was that they didn't have much of a different total daily energy expenditure than those living in modern societies, which a lot of people would say, well, why is that? How are they not burning more calories if they're so much more active? But here's the thing. That model that he has of constrained energy refers to the down regulations that we see from metabolic adaptation. So if we think about it from like an ancestral perspective or how the Hadza live, they're in a state of low energy availability. So what he was saying was that total daily energy expenditure isn't strictly a linear model, meaning we can't just keep, burning, we can't just keep doing exercise and burning calories to enjoy more food. So that's like the whole philosophy. I always tell my clients, listen, you can't outrun a bad diet and you can't run marathons to eat pizzas. That's not how it is. However, this model doesn't say that you're completely capped at energy expenditure, which is why we see so many high-level athletes. Like, for instance, I've worked with CrossFitters or MMA athletes or, high-level competitive physique athletes, pro bodybuilders. And they need an enormous amount of calories to stay weight stable as a result of how much activity they do on a daily basis. So really, when we looked at this constrained energy model, it's more applicable to hunter-gatherer societies whose bodies are trying to fend off excess energy expenditure, because that would threaten their survival and their ability to stay in society because they don't have unlimited access. Whereas we, in a high energy flux model, yes, we could burn more calories, we could do more activity, but we're also putting more energy into the system. So what the hunter-gatherer societies are in, yes, they're constrained, but we have to think about it as the same type of scenario as a contest prep dieter. If you're eating less food and you're doing more activity, you're going to be constrained eventually. And that's not what the high flux model is. So that's why when people talk about high flux, I'm saying it's more applicable and more beneficial for weight loss maintenance than for weight loss, because eventually we're going to see down regulations in eat. You're going to have compensatory mechanisms which make you burn less. So say you're doing all this activity, you're doing 20, 25, 30,000 steps a day, you're probably going to sit down more, or you're probably going to have unconscious or subconscious activities, fidgeting, how you gesture with your hands. I remember Lane Norton did a seminar years back where he even did a side-by-side comparison of him in contest prep versus him in off season. And you could see that he was blinking slower in contest prep. So it's stuff that you would never notice and you couldn't track. So yes, there is a constrained model, but I don't think that it applies to physical activity levels for those that are eating a sufficient amount, because we're not getting those down regulations in hormones. We're not getting those down regulations in thermic effective feeding because we're eating more. Our basal metabolic rate is higher because we're eating more. We're not, underweight or at these very low levels of body fat. So we're not suffering all these hormonal and metabolic implications that you would during like a contest dieting. So that's kind of where I see when I looked over the literature from Herman Ponzer a few years ago, I said, yeah, this makes complete sense. They're doing a huge amount of activity, but they're not in high energy flux. They're not eating enough to be so. And it makes sense because they don't have unlimited food access. Where say you or I, Rachel, we're able to, fuel up if we're increasing. So for instance, I'll tell you personally, I've done experiments on myself where I've been in a low energy flux state. So I've made myself kind of sit on my ass and be sedentary and see what amount of calories maintains my weight. And it's generally 28 to 2,900 calories. Now, when I'm in a high energy flux model, I'm between 36 and 3,900 calories. So there's a huge gap. So if there really was that higher end cap that, and I'm doing 15 to 20,000 steps a day, yes, the more activity you do, say in a dieting scenario, you're going to burn less calories. Because think about it. You're a lighter, leaner individual, so less body mass to move around. You're more efficient at activity. Your mitochondria is upregulated, so you're more efficient at every movement. So you're burning less from NEAT, you're burning less from EAT or exercise activity thermogenesis. You're eating less, so you have lower thermic effective feeding, and your body mass is lower, so your resting metabolic rate is lower. So yeah, there is a constrained model, but it doesn't apply to people in weight maintenance if they're eating more and doing more.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Context is key for sure. Awesome. Thank you for diving into that. So I'm just curious. So you average between 15 to 20, you said K steps per day. So can you just kind of maybe break down for our listeners, like what that looks like for you in terms of like how your day's set up to make sure that you do hit that?
Absolutely. So my routine is a little bit, out of the ordinary. I run two businesses. I run a supplement company, but then I also have an online nutrition coaching company. But I'm someone that I've always been very, very active. And in times that I've had, say, an office position, because I have been a national sales director where I've been in an office, I've noticed that I've put on body fat during those time periods, although my calorie intake is lower. And although I'm training hard and I'm doing quote unquote my cardio, I generally keep cardio in year round, but it's at the same amount. I'm doing 20 to 30 minutes of direct cardio every day. However, the biggest decrease that I saw in the calorie expenditure was through my NEAT and through my steps and the fact that I was sitting rather than standing up. So how I really get that is I'm up every day, like 3:30 to 4 a.m. And I have like my own, it's my personal time. Those first 2 hours of the day, I'm non-responsive. I'm not reactive to social media or to text messages or to emails or any of that sort. So I go on a 30-minute walk at least. I usually have an educational seminar or a podcast that's already on cue. So all my notifications are turned off. It's just me in an educational environment. And that's actually been shown, doing physical activity while learning has actually shown to increase productivity and increase, they say like the neurons that fire together wire together. So you're essentially able to absorb information better when you are moving as opposed to, and that makes sense. If you think about it, like Rachel, when you were in college, when you would sit in a boring lecture, did you absorb anything? You probably wanted to fall asleep. But if you were moving, I'm not saying the boring lecture wouldn't have been as bad, but say that, I'll tell you personally, when I watch a lecture and I'm sitting down in my dining room or in my living room and I'm watching something, I'm more likely to get distracted. I'm looking at a laptop or at my TV monitor and I have my phone next to me and I have all these different distractions and I'm also, seated and comfortable. Whereas when I'm moving, I have that one thing. I have the objective, make sure I don't get hit by a car because I'm outside. And B, I have something that I'm listening to. I'm actively taking notes. So it allows me to get more of that information retention and really reinforce that kind of stuff. So that's my first part of the day. Then I train very early in the morning. So I'm in the gym by 6 a.m. And then one thing that I do to increase my NEAT and my step count is actually my rests in between sets are not seated ever. So if you really look at the research behind calorie expenditure and weight training, it's very, very low. And a lot of people don't realize why, because they think, well, I was really intense in the gym. And it's because it's interspersed activity. It's intermittent. So you do a set, say it's 30 to 40 seconds, and then you're resting for 2 to 3 minutes. Well, what I do is it's early in the morning. There's hardly anyone in there. But even if it was a packed gym, I would do this, to be honest with you. I take laps around the gym. So in between my sets, I time my rest intervals. I just walk up and down. And some of my clients, I tell them to do the same. Listen, there's no reason to be sitting there on your phone. You're there to train. You're there to stay in the zone. Put on, a playlist, put on a podcast, put on something that's going to put you in a good state of mind and just do some movement. I'm not telling you to jump on a treadmill and sprint, just walk up and down, the aisle. Mm-hmm. So I get a large amount of steps in that way. So by 8 or 9 a.m., I'm already 10 to 12K in most days. So then other than that, to hit that last 3,000, I'm very busy with my work day from between 8 or 9 o'clock to around 7 p.m. So at least that 10-hour block. So what I do is I take 10-minute walks after some of my meals. So after my post-workout meal, I'll make sure to get a 10-minute walk after my next 2 meals. And then generally I'm already at 15,000 steps. And on weekends, how I get 20,000 is one of my favorite activities. I love outdoor activities. So for me, I love hiking. So it's not like I'm intentionally trying to get steps, but I just like being out in nature. So it's something that I've personally found that I like. I have some clients that they like skiing, they like different activities, so I just had them integrate that and they go out into whatever, outdoor. I really want it to be outdoor, to be honest with you, like the greenhouse effect of being in nature. But I really try to just encourage them to not live this sedentary life where they're inside watching TV and taking in the media. And that's my whole thing. I'm like, listen, we're trying to grow your body, but we're also trying to grow your mind and your relationships, because that's what's really a huge thing, is community and relationships for overall health and longevity. And so I'm trying to integrate that into my programs. I tell my clients all the time, as a coach, I'm not here just for the X's and O's and macros and calories and sets and reps. I'm here to better your life in all aspects: stress management, lifestyle modification, behavior, change. So it's multifaceted. So that's how I get it. But honestly, it's very easy for me to maintain that.
Love it. Love everything you said, because it's definitely the model that I go with too, as well as, what you said about, I'm not just your coach because of, giving you macro prescriptions and training and stuff like that. There's so much more to transformation and to sustain transformation. Like you said, stress management, all of that jazz. So love it. And what you mentioned about the gym, like not sitting down during reps, that's something that I've personally done for a long time. Like I never allow myself to, sit during a rest period, even if I'm, like on the leg press or something, always getting up. And even if you just I found myself actually this morning, I was doing hack squats and there was like a lot of people in the gym. So I was literally just doing circles around it during the rest periods. And you're getting steps in. It's super, easy. You just have to kind of make that switch in your head. Like, okay, during this rest period, I'm going to start, instead of sitting down, I'm just going to walk around. Even if you are, on your phone or whatever, you can still kind of, pace around. And once you do that for a little while, it just becomes a habit. Like you're never going to find yourself, after a few months of doing that, like you'll never find yourself sitting down again during rest period, because it just becomes part of your lifestyle, like you said. Yeah. And then also another thing you mentioned, like in the morning, like trying not to get hit by a car. That's something that I found too. Like whenever I have a call, I always take my calls on walks or
I love that. I was just about to mention that.
Yeah. Or standing up, or like pacing around, my apartment, because with that too, like whenever I'm taking a call, like I could be on a call for an hour and just be walking around outside, and it just goes by like so fast, like, because you're paying attention, right? You're paying attention to the call, or you're paying attention to the podcast or the seminar or whatever you're listening to. Sometimes I get home after a long walk on a call and I literally don't even remember how I got back. And I'm like, oh man, like I should probably pay a little bit more attention so I don't, get hit by a car. So that's why I was laughing when you said that, because sometimes it just like, you don't even realize, you could be walking for hours and, doing something else and distracting yourself. And it's crazy, like what that can do if you just be a little bit more mindful and like set yourself up for success, right? Like if you have a call or, for example, just for people listening, like if you have a block of time on your calendar each day where you set calls, right? For me, I try to set all my calls in the afternoon, and I try to take those on walks, right? Or if you, maybe you need to be near your computer, if you are on calls, okay, let's get a wireless headset or a Bluetooth headset and, take the call and just pace around your office and, go back to your computer if you need to take notes or something. There's so many different ways to like make it more convenient for you. So yeah, that's just something to think about. Is there any other like tips or anything else that might be out of the ordinary in terms of increasing that energy flux that you found, or did we kind of go over them all?
I think we hit on most of them, but the whole thing to me is a big thing is finding forms of physical activity you love, because I really find that I could have everything laid out in a program for a client, but if they don't like what they're doing, it is in big part psychology. So for me, like I mentioned, I like to go hiking. And also like you do, I take most of my work related calls standing or walking around. So I do that as well. So oftentimes I'll, finish a meal, I'll get right on a call, so I'll jump on a call and I'll kill two birds with one stone. I'll be doing my walk and not even thinking about it. And I also I work with a lot of like busy working professionals and people that have very limited amounts of time. And I say, listen, if you run, like I work with a couple CEOs and I'm like, listen, you don't have to technically be in the office, in your exact office. You have the flexibility. Get up, use it. I'll be honest with you, I have a couple guys that use a treadmill desk, so they're walking and it's 1 mile per hour, but they're burning double the amount of calories that they would. And it's not even about that. Like I said, it's about the clarity of mind. It's about the appetite regulation, which is massive, which we'll go into studies on that, because I think people will be surprised because there is this thought that exercise generally increases appetite, but there's other, research that'll show that there's reasons as to why it's beneficial. But other things, I have people that, like I said, do gardening, going on a walk in nature, they take their kids to the park. That's huge. I'm always reinforcing that with, I have a lot of parents that I work with, and they're like, listen, I'm busy with my kids. And I'm like, that's the best form, because think about kids. We do have an obesity epidemic, but it's fractionalized for children. And it is becoming worse if you look at the statistics. But generally, if you think about kids in our age, when we were in society where, 20 years ago, we were outside playing, you very rarely saw kids that were obese. And that's because they were doing forms of exercise without even knowing it. We're playing around, we're going to the park, we're running around, and it's stuff that's highly beneficial. However, it's not even things you're thinking about as exercise. So really what I'm trying to do is get them to engage in enjoyable activities and decompress and relax. And, essentially look at these as just daily activities, things that they enjoy rather than things they have to do. So it's, I really want to get that out there, that this is not about thinking about it in black and white as exercise. This is movement for your health, for your longevity, for your psychology, for your mental health, all these type of things, and just integrate it into your day. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. Like, yes, if you sit on your ass all day and you're looking to get 12 to 15,000 steps, then you're going to have to do, hours of walking or something of that sort. And that's an unfortunate circumstance. So, I try to frame it in a different perspective where they're not thinking about it as direct exercise where they're going to dread it. I want them to look forward to it. And that's my whole thing with everything I do, because I stay lean, year round, and I have for years. And it's only been due to the fact that I've integrated this into my lifestyle. It's not a requirement that I have to do, or it's not something that I dread doing. And it's been sustainable and maintainable because of how I've approached it. And that's what I really try to get through with my clients.
Yeah, exactly. Make it part of your lifestyle. That's huge. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people struggle with. It's like, okay, I'm going to, go on this, diet or training plan for 3 months and, lose all the body fat or whatever it is. And then, okay, what happens after that, right? Like, you're not gonna be able to maintain that. I was just talking to a client yesterday. This is kind of a different conversation, but it was about, completely eliminating alcohol for the next 12 weeks. And then I was like, okay, well, yeah, you can do that, right? And you can, be restrictive with that. You have a goal of body fat loss, but okay, what's going to happen afterwards? Why don't we, get you to your goal, get you to your result, but maybe we, incorporate a little bit of alcohol on the weekend so that you can get used to understanding that you don't have to be super restrictive with that, because you can fit that into your lifestyle. And then beyond 3 months from now, you'll know how to incorporate that to still maintain your results. So I think it's just all of those things, whether it's, movement or food, whatever it is related to, there's different ways that you need to just figure out, okay, how can I fit this plan into my lifestyle rather than trying to fit like my lifestyle into a specific plan. Like, it doesn't work like that. And if you try to look at it like that and you try to do that, you're not going to be successful long term. So just all about that awareness piece.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is a lot of people look at energy flux through the concept of fitness, which is great, that the fitness industry has kind of taken it and making it, made it its own. But here's the thing. When we look at studies on energy flux, it's actually activities of daily living. So when I break down some of the studies for you, you're going to see not one of them only one study that I'm going to go over was direct exercise interventions. So it is about integrating things into your daily lifestyle and doing things you enjoy or doing things that are part of your work. That's another thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's integrating things into your daily routine, which are going to benefit you and that you don't dread, but you're able to sustainably do, which is really the benefit of using a high flux model for long-term weight and fat loss maintenance.
Yeah, for sure. So do we want to end on a few of those studies? Maybe you can just give us a synopsis to end on that.
Absolutely. So cool. Going to go over a few. The first one I want to go over, because this is the one that people are most surprised about. My favorite is not the first one we're going to go over, but the one that people are most surprised about is appetite regulation, because there is that. A lot of times people think about calorie expenditure only on the calories outside of the equation, and they don't realize that it actually impacts the calories inside of the equation, because they're both, innately tied to one another. And a lot of times, in fitness, people try to separate them almost not into two camps, but they separate them into two variables. Like calories in are one separate entity and calories out are another separate entity, and they're intrinsically tied. So there was a study done by Below in 2018 that looked at the J-shaped curve of energy intake. So what they showed is that as levels of activity increase, there's a corresponding regulation of appetite and body weight. So they found this by looking at factory workers and saw as they went from moderate to high to very high levels of activity, their body weight actually remained stable. So if you think about it, all these people are they're going into a high flux state. They're doing a high level of exercise, or rather, sorry, they're doing a high level of expenditure. And this is due to the fact that those who move more are thus able to eat more and still maintain energy balance, despite being at a higher caloric intake. So they showed that this was due to the fact that you reach higher levels, when you reach higher levels of activity, you are more sensitive to satiety signals post-meal, which allows you to regulate your appetite more regularly and be less likely to overeat, which helps you avoid weight gain. Now, what's interesting is that the factory workers who engage in low or very low amounts of physical activity, so those that were essentially sedentary, such as the ones that worked in the office jobs or were in management positions, actually had dysregulated satiety signals and poor appetite regulation. So this caused them to actually eat more than they burned, which resulted in them being unable to maintain their weight and instead gaining weight. So this is actually something that we commonly see with sedentary people that are overweight and who continue to have like that drive to eat, which you often hear about from obese clients, that they're constantly hungry. And it's because their energy expenditure isn't matching their intake, and that's causing weight gain, but they're also having an increase in appetite, which is driving that. So these two scenarios are both, examples of the regulatory effects of energy flux. Basically what our body wants to do is get us into a certain level of energy flux based on our total daily energy expenditure. So we could do that by moving more and eating more, as we see in the lean and active individuals or the factory workers that had higher amounts of physical activity, or by simply eating more and weighing more, which increases our total daily energy expenditure and results in being overweight. So when I kind of extrapolate that, sometimes, my clients will ask me about these concepts and I try to give them, I'm not just going to send them a study because that's not going to help them. So really what I try to do is break it down for what we see in the real world. So, I'll tell you personally, I've seen plenty of individuals, especially in more of like the lifestyle and Gen Pop communities, which finish the fat loss phase where they were restricting calories and doing lots of activities. And once they finish the diet and they got to their end result, they go back to living their regular lifestyle post-diet. And then we often see this, resulting in experiencing excess weight gain and then having a hard time managing appetite. Now, on the flip side, I work with a lot of physique competitors. And although this sometimes can be seen with like a post-show rebound, due to the prevalence and popularity of approaches like, say, reverse dieting, where many individuals are then able to stay lean while walking their calories up. But that's partially due to the fact that they're staying active with their training, their cardio, and their steps. So we see more of that regulation of the appetite as compared to those that went from higher activity and low calories to no activity and high calories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense for sure. So is that that was the appetite study. So are there, because I know you mentioned there was two other ones.
Yeah, so we have another one that looks at the benefits of going from a low flux state to a high flux state. And then I have a really interesting one on the Amish, which shows the benefits of just integrating high flux into your lifestyle.
Cool. So yeah, maybe we have we have some time. So why don't we maybe you can just give us like a quick synopsis on those two? Because I mean, it's super interesting, with studies. It's one of those things where, we can't take we have to take studies with a grain of salt because they are, average, right? And there's obviously, limitations to all studies, but, having a bunch of studies, shows us that there is obviously application to this in different areas. So I do like to kind of dive into this a little bit. So yeah, if you want to just give us a synopsis on the last two, and then we can wrap it up from there.
Awesome. Yeah. So, all right. So there was a study by Paris et al. In 2016, and it was a crossover study with 6 obese individuals. And this was the one I was referring to, which shows that from going from a low flux state to a high flux state. So essentially what they did was they took participants that were obese and they put them into moderate energy restriction and got them to a 7% weight loss over several months. After they finished the weight loss period, they went through 3 months of maintaining this weight loss and they found their energy balance, essentially. So the amount of maintenance calories that they needed just to stabilize their weight. Now, following the stabilization phase, they were put on a trial of being in both high flux and low energy flux. So they went into high flux for 4 days, and then they had a washout period, and then they went into low flux for 4 days. And they did this because they wanted each participant to act as their own control. Now, in the high flux state, they noticed that they experienced higher satiety and lower hunger than they were in the low flux state. And then they also showed that the high flux state participants had a higher resting metabolic rate. So we see that in and of itself, like the fact that you can go from high flux to low flux and being in high flux leads to greater adherence because you're dealing with less hunger. So think about like the main reasons why people fail diets: due to lack of energy, and then due to, skewed hunger signals or a drive to eat. So if you could get yourself, they were both in energy balance in both scenarios. So in a low flux state, yes, they were eating less calories, but they were doing significantly less, calorie expenditure. So they were at weight maintenance. But then the high flux state, they were doing more activity and eating more, and they experienced more satiety, better fullness, and they had a higher resting metabolic rate. So there was multiple benefits from going into that high flux state, which, it's only 4 days of each scenario. But like I said, I did this on myself where I wanted to see just how my satiety was. And I also wanted to see what type of calories can I be on? And I'll tell you personally, if I have a client come to me, like say, Rachel, would you rather be 1,500 calorie Rachel after a diet, or 2,500 calorie Rachel?
2,500 for sure.
All day. Exactly. So that's where I really try, sometimes I'll send this stuff out to people, or I look into it myself because I want to get things that are going to reinforce what I'm seeing personally. And it's always good to see this data, but it is seeing in the real world. And I'll tell you, I've seen this with dozens and dozens of clients where I tell them sometimes they don't want to move a lot. And I tell them, all right, well, if you want to maintain your weight loss, we have to keep that lower calories. And you are going to experience greater hunger. And sometimes I won't even nocebo them with that information. I'll say, listen, we could try the low activity and lower calorie model. You want to maintain weight, these are your maintenance calories. But then I generally see that they'll become a weekday dieter, where they'll diet Monday through Friday, and then on weekends, it all goes out the window. So it's just, explaining to people, listen, there are different approaches to weight loss maintenance. And then the last study is an Amish study. So Rachel, are you familiar with Amish?
A little bit.
Okay, so just for anyone out there that isn't familiar with Amish, I'm from the Northeast, so there's an Amish community state over from me. So Amish are pretty much like said in the 1800s. So they're not into modern society whatsoever. They don't use cars. They don't watch television. They're very rural in everything that they do. So they don't use the modern conveniences of life. So this study by Bassett et al. Looked at 98 subjects, and then they provided them with pedometers and activity questionnaires, and then ranked them according to their activity level. Now, keep in mind, most people in an Amish community are manual laborers. So the males are farmers, woodworkers, construction workers, and builders. And then the women are homemakers, but they're fairly active. They do a lot of things by hand. So Monday through Saturday, the male step counts averaged 20,000 steps, while the female step counts were averaged at 15,000 steps. And then they take 1 day off from work. And even on that day, which is Sunday, they still maintain 10,000 steps. So they're always, high activity essentially. And what's most interesting about this study is the body fat percentages that these individuals maintained. The males were at an average of 9.4% body fat, now with a 0% prevalence of obesity. And the women were at an average of 25% body fat with a 9% prevalence of obesity. Now, keep in mind, these aren't physique athletes. They're not trying to actively, get lean, but both genders within this community are able to sustain a lean, healthy physique and avoid the obesogenic environment of our modern world. Now, the kicker is that this study didn't directly track their caloric intake, but they did look at their diet, and they did an estimation of their calories per day. And their diet was said to be composed of meat, potato, gravies, eggs, bread, and even sweets like pies and cakes, and was said to be high in fat and refined sugar. And the guys averaged 3,600 calories per day, while the women were a little over 2,000. So they were, eating a fair amount of calories. It wasn't like these people were in an energy deficit. They were in high flux, eating high calories, having high expenditure, and were still able to maintain that low percentage of body fat without even intentionally trying. So this is something, sometimes I'll extrapolate this and say, listen, for someone that's really trying, you're active in the gym, you're training, we can leverage this to our ability. So I'm very big on pulling the nutritional levers or the lifestyle levers with my clients: higher need, higher energy flux, high volume foods, anything I could do to make them feel more satiated, increase calorie expenditure, help them with daily movement, help increase, metabolic flexibility, and all these other aspects in a way that it's convenient for their lifestyle, but it also warrants them the results that they want in a sustainable manner, because no one wants to be in that restricted model of low energy flux where you're never eating a lot and you're doing less activity, but it's because you don't have any energy.
Yeah, for sure. Super interesting study. That's super cool. Definitely all about G-Flux. And do you know what? So it is, people do refer to it as G-Flux. We've been saying energy flux. Is it just That's just like the short version, just from the word energy. Is that where the G is coming from?
So my impression of G-Flux was actually that it came from John Berardi from Precision Nutrition.
Oh, okay.
That was the first time I ever heard of G-Flux. In the literature, it isn't referred to that as energy flux or as G-Flux. It's energy flux. So I kind of go with that interpretation. I kind of side with that. I know that early on, 10 years ago, I heard about it, G-Flux from John Berardi. I had done the precision nutrition courses very early on. And he kind of referred to it as being able to build muscle by being more active. And it was kind of like a body recomposition thing. And that's not really what I'm seeing both with clients or within the literature. But I know it was a very similar scenario. Eat more, move more, be active, and just fuel yourself, which is really the basic thing. So it's not a huge thing to differentiate, but it is a little bit different terminology.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And one last quick thing that just came to mind. So I just want to make sure that we kind of talk about this, because when I'm talking about, cardio and conditioning, things like that, we've already kind of debunked that. We've chatted about that. But we know that, the issue with, traditional cardio and traditional conditioning, especially on, a fat loss journey, is that your body adapts to it, right? So you have to continue to do more, the amount of quote unquote calories you burned, last week, maybe rowing a mile or running a mile is going to be a little bit less this week and next week, because your body's going to adapt to that, right? So is there any adaptation that you've seen or in the literature or with clients that occurs with just general like movement when we're talking about energy flux, or not, because maybe it's all these different types of activities that your body doesn't adapt to because it's, there's variance?
Yes. So these are going to be two different answers, essentially. It's very person dependent and individual. However, they don't look at that in the literature on energy flux specifically. More of like some people compare and contrast the energy flux model with the constrained energy expenditure model that we spoke on with Herman Poncer. But like I said, it's on different subsects. So we really can't apply it one to the other. We can't look at like hunter-gatherer tribes and apply it to active, people that have excess food availability. But at the same time, we know that the body's an adaptive organism and it has adaptive mechanisms in place. So yes, you are going to downregulate expenditure. And now sometimes people, I'll hear that argument on the internet and they'll say, well, you're burning less calories. You're still in energy flux though. If you're still at weight maintenance and you're doing more activity, you're still at energy flux. And let's think about it. Like I said, and I always try to get across to people, it's not just about calorie expenditure. It's about being able to eat more food, be more satiated with that food, have a better metabolic profile, have better insulin sensitivity. It's all these other benefits. So I never really worry about that calorie expenditure. And that's also when I said about the tracking mechanisms, I try not to let clients, or even myself, I'll be honest with you, I'm very type A, very analytical. I have Whoop band, I have an Oura ring. I track all these metrics with myself and with my clients. And I try not to let us get trapped on the calorie, the calorie counting, track essentially. Calorie counting is for your food intake, for calories in. Calories out, it's very variable and it's very hard to predict. So really what I'm just trying to do is get them active and make them realize it's not just about burning calories, because often what I see when people take that type of mindset is that they apply that to everything. And all of a sudden their weight training becomes a circuit training so they could burn more calories, and everything within their lifestyle. Instead of doing, like you were saying with your clients, hey, can I do HIIT sprints, or can I do a class? Can I do F45 or something? And I'm like, listen, no, that's not what I want you doing. That's going to tax you. That's going to put you in a completely different, you're going to be in a glycolytic environment. You're going to be burning carbohydrates as energy rather than fat. Like I want you to do relaxing activity that, turns on the parasympathetic side of your autonomic nervous system, not that puts you in a sympathetic state. So I always try to get it across that it's not just about the calorie expenditure side. It's about the regulation of appetite. It's about the weight loss maintenance benefits. And that's why I try not, and I differentiate this with people. This isn't really like a weight loss mechanism. Yes, you could use higher expenditure. People use cardio, people use caloric restriction combined with cardio for weight loss, but you wouldn't be in higher energy flux because you would need to eat more to be in high energy flux. So there are differentiations. The body will adapt, but it's not like these are innate adaptations that we're not going to be able to avoid. However, if we're able to eat more, stay lean, have all those other benefits, raise our resting metabolic rate, those are other things that are going to offset that. And also just living a high energy flux lifestyle, a lot of the adaptations that we see, if we look at metabolic adaptation, 85 to 90% of that comes from downregulation's need. But if you're staying active, you're counting your steps, you're making sure that you're actively, putting in more movement throughout your daily lifestyle, you're not going to downregulate meat as much as the next person.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Love it. That was awesome. I think you hit on a lot of really key points there. And I think the biggest thing is just like making it part of your lifestyle, right? Not trying to, with anything, right? It's not trying to find the quick fix or, maybe I'll increase my steps to 15,000 for this week, but then, can you actually maintain that? So just finding what works for you and then, being aware, right? So love it. Awesome. All right. Well, one thing I do want to mention, so if you could actually send me those studies that you referenced, and I will add those to the show notes in case anybody listening wants to check them out. And do you want to just tell our listeners where they can find you, website, social media, all that?
Absolutely. So you guys can find me most easily on Instagram at Brandon DaCruz _. And then any inquiries you guys have, any questions, feel free to email me at bdacruzfitness@gmail.com.
Awesome. I will definitely link those in the show notes. And unfortunately, we couldn't record video today because technology sucks sometimes. But I'll have to have you back on for a second recording with video, and maybe we can chat about another subject. If anybody listening has anything that popped up that you're interested in and you want to ask Brandon about, definitely you can reach out to me on social media or email. I'll link all those in the show notes. Thank you so much, Brandon, for taking the time. I'm excited to get this out there for everybody to listen and learn more about G-Flux or Energy Flux.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Rachel.
Awesome. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right. Thanks for listening to that episode with Brandon DaCruz. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit about Energy Flux and you took away some practical ways that you can apply this Energy Flux theory to your own life. And if you want to follow Brandon, you can check him out on Instagram. I will link his handle in the show notes. And as always, if you did enjoy this episode, please help me spread the word by taking a screenshot of it, posting it to your Instagram story, and tagging me at rachelgregory.cns. You can also tag Brandon, and that will help us to spread the word about the show and get it out to more people. All right, I will see you next time for another episode of MetFlex and Chill.